Good morning, campers. Welcome to Radio Camp Haplet, a Percy Jackson Reeling podcast. I am your host, Zach.
And I'm B.
And this week we have a very special guest. And I would say that the Muse have been quite nice to us. We have some pretty songs to the point of where, like, the songbirds are singing, the mockingjays. I don't know why we have mockingjays, but they're also singing.
Wrong YA series.
So, Rob, why don't you introduce yourself? Who are you?
Hi, guys. So I'm Rob Rokicki. I am the composer lyricist for the Percy Jackson musical, The Lightning Thief. And I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show, and dare I say, taking something like Percy Jackson, pardon the pun, it must have been a Herculean task.
See what you did there. Yeah, it was not easy, but when you don't know any better, you think you can do it, and you just do it, But it also helped having an incredible book writer that was a wonderful man by the name of Joe Trace, who you've had on the show, who very much helped guide what and how we were going to tell and how we were going to do it. And that made my life a lot easier in terms of how to structure this mammoth beast.
Yeah, because we talked to Joe a while ago, and he was kind of already a fan of Percy Jackson before he did the musical. Were you at all familiar with the musical or with the books before you jumped into making the musical, or was this your first introduction to this stuff?
It was no, I didn't know all. Sorry to say. However, I got caught up very quickly. My mom was a history teacher, so I knew Greek myths. I had a gigantic book of illustrated Greek myths as a kid, so I knew all the stories, and so I ate them up. As soon as I read the first book, I fell in love with it and just kept reading.
So you've read the other Percy Jackson books?
In the first series, yeah. They're great, and
you're actually ahead of me in terms of reading these books because I'm only on the third one for the show.
Titan's Curse, yeah, that's a good one. The Maze one is my favorite. That's my fave. Yeah. I'm an actor. Primarily was how I started out, though I always wrote musicals. And as an actor, I had been asked. I had just booked my first Broadway show after busting my butt for years and years and years, and then the show. The weekend before we were supposed to start our first rehearsals, I learned accordion for 6 months. The show was pulled, the producers pulled out, and the show was canceled. So I was kind of floundering, and I didn't know what to do. I was looking for a project, my aesthetic is writing, rock music for the theater. And Joe Trace had already adapted a play version of The Lightning Thief that they were interested in doing kind of as a play at first. And they were like, this needs to sing. It needs to be bigger. We can fit more adventure into it. It should be with a rock and roll score. And Joe asked Joe Iconis, and Joe was like, you should ask Rob Rokicki. Joe Iconis' dance card was a little full, and they were already writing a show called Be More Chill Together, which is about to open on Broadway in 2 weeks, which is great, also based on a YA novel.
Yeah.
Yes.
But Joe Iconis and I have known each other for many, many, many years. We play together. I play out with him, and he plays in my gigs and vice versa. And I was desperate for a project that I could throw my whole self into, and Joe was kind enough to recommend me. I still had to write a song. Or a couple songs actually on spec. You write demos, and then I sent them to Joe Trace. He had to like them, and then we had to send the songs to Rick's agents and folks and see if they liked them, and they all did. So that was great. There were several teams that submitted writing songs as well, but I was the one that was selected. So I feel like I got a foot in the door, but I still had to work my butt off to prove that I would work on it. And fun story: the first scene that Joe Trace adapted was a scene with Sally and Percy on the beach, and that was the first song that I adapted to, a song called Strong, which is, of all the versions of the show, it's maybe the only song that really hasn't changed. It meant that Joe and I were on the same page. We really wanted to focus on making sure the mother-son relationship hadn't gotten lost, and that was something we felt that the movies had definitely lost.
The movies lost a lot of things.
Well, I'm not going to go into all of that. I'm not going to go into all of that, but yeah, that was a big thing. We were like, we got to get the tone right, and we can't lose that. We can't lose the heart of the show. That's the heart of the show.
And that's what makes the show so great, being able to listen to the soundtrack finally, because we can actually talk about it, because we wanted to see it live and really, really experience it. And this is like a kind of our compromise is we're gonna listen to it, but we're also obviously we're gonna go see it.
Oh, good.
Hopefully soon. Yeah, I got my tickets. I'm ready
Yes,
to
very
go.
soon. Got my tickets. We're ready to go. But when it comes to like the show, when I was listening to the soundtrack, that is so much different from the Chris Columbus version. Is that there's more soul, even though obviously a play has less of a budget. Somehow, what you guys were able to accomplish, like no offense, but you guys like kicked the butt out of that movie by 1,000 feet.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's interesting that you mentioned the song "Strong" because I think that jumped out at me like when I was listening to the soundtrack for the first time. Like, oh, they really get like what these books are about, I guess, because I think you look at the movies and it's very focused on kind of making this action adventure film that's very in the vein of Harry Potter, and it feels like kind of like treading the same ground. Well, like I think there's like this heart to the musical that seems to really work with what the books represent, like this the story of this kid who has a complicated relationship with his dad who he doesn't know, and like that just that song like it I mean, I guess musicals in general do a good job of like sort of taking something internal and making it like an explicit thing of like someone's internal monologue becomes outward, but it works really well for this story.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a bit of tough love, that Sally's given, but also, Sally's a three-dimensional character. We wanted to like give her some like stuff to do as well. And the books are so much about parents and kids, and that's so much about like so Greek, right? About like cycles. I mean, looking all the way back to the Oresteia, which is like I adapted. Well, my first musical I wrote was this crazy weird adaptation of the Oresteia Aeschylus as like this cop drama. It was like really dark. There was lots of murder. Everybody played the prostitute. Oh, it was awful. It was this dark, gritty version of this show. But it was looking at these kinds of cycles of like, are we doomed to repeat our parents' mistakes? And here is this, the story about like kids from broken homes that like have to take agency themselves to find who they are, and they can't rely on their leaders or their parents sometimes to figure out what's best for them. And we see that like their parents are they're not perfect, they're fallible, and the fact that Percy can like forgive his dad is a huge thing. We're dealing with like for a comedy that's like crazy slapstick on one second to like have moments where we say lines like what Poseidon says, I'm still sorry you were born, to like have that be a line in the show, because the hero's life is never easy and you have to make your own decision, stuff like that. I mean, I thought it was kind of important to have that kind of stuff in the show and to retain that kind of depth that is in the book, so that so it isn't just a slick, polished kind of Hollywoodization of the stories.
Speaking of Hollywoodization, the one thing that I notice, which I think is one of the biggest notes, is that if we look at the movie, the main focus is kind of like, because they upscaled them, they're like 16-year-olds. Of course, Percy and Annabeth are going to have to fall in love and have a kiss and all that stuff. Whereas in the musical, it's more about friendship and it's less like there isn't like a tacky like love ballad about how much I love you.
Oh my God, I've never been interested in love songs. I don't think I've written a love song in like any musical I've written, except for I'm working on a weird musical right now about a woman trying to escape an oceanic sea cult.
Okay.
But it's based on 2 years of research of like actual cults, and it's wild rock and roll adventure, but it's she happens to be a gay character, so there is a love ballad there. I don't think I've ever written a heteronormative, I hate that word, but like love ballad between like a traditional binary, like man and woman, and I'm kind of proud of that, because it's kind of like, okay, great, I'm much more interested in other relationships and friendships.
Yeah. I mean, you do get the sense that Percy likes Annabeth. Like I noticed in the lyrics there's like these subtle hints of him being like, I think it's the song where he's like, oh, is this a dream? And then he says, oh, the most beautiful face. And then it's just like this little moment where he sort of reveals his feelings towards Annabeth, and it very much mirrors what happens in the book, where he like sees Annabeth's face, and goes, "Who is this beautiful person?" But it's very subtle, as opposed to it being like immediately like, "Oh, who's that hot person?" Like, let's make this really like hit the nail on the head about the romance plot, because that really wasn't, super prevalent, especially in The Lightning Thief.
Yeah, in the books, that's like it sort of happens later in the stories, but we kind of really wanted to focus on the first book and what make kind of setting us into the world of this thing. And here's a kid just trying to get his footing in this crazy world. I think the romance can only happen after the friendship is established, and also after Percy respects her, because Annabeth is my favorite character, and I feel like she's just the most intriguing to me, and she's had to put up with a lot to try to like be seen. And so I think, yeah, it would cheapen her to be like, well, of course she's the girl to be won or something, and that just was like not intriguing to us at all.
Well, that's the unique thing about this book series is that there's so many great characters, and a lot of them in this musical get to shine. Like, actually, my favorite song is "My Grand Plan." Like, I was listening to it.
Yeah, it's my favorite song too. We almost cut it because we didn't know where to put it in the show. It was hard.
It's like one of my favorites, I think. Yeah.
I told Joe I will not cut this song no matter what. I wrote another song just in case, but I really, really love that song.
Low key, I kind of teared up because it's such a great, beautiful song about Annabeth like pouring her heart out and talking about how she all she wants to do is just be remembered and be seen instead of wearing an invisibility cap for the rest of her life.
Oh, thanks. It was right there in front of us, and it was one of those moments that we just were like, "Oh, this makes sense." And we used it in one version. I had like an entire intro where she lists all the Greek heroes and how they're all famous and they're all men and they always screw it up or die, and that she's going to be remembered because of that. I love that verse. And in one version, the original off Broadway, she used the song as a training montage to teach Percy how to use his sword, and that was cool. But in this current tour, and I think we've kind of set it the way it needs to be. It's just two people kind of figuring it out, and she's kind of just like unloading on Percy of all this stuff after this crazy Medusa sequence where they are angry at each other because it's again this like cycles of stuff where Annabeth's like, yeah, Medusa dated your dad, he was sneaking into Athena's temple, Medusa was to date your dad, and it screwed everything up. And he's like, is that why you hate me? Because our parents hate me? And it's this like, she's like, no, it's because you don't even know how to hold a sword right. You got this quest. I want to get this. I work my butt off to try to get seen, and what do I get? Nothing. Your mom doesn't respect you. You get an invisibility hat, And so, I've taken some fans have been like, well, why isn't she talking about architecture in this thing? I'm like, we had some lyrics that alluded to that. We had a whole sequence where they went to the Hoover Dam, and I just was like, honestly, it just needs to be a little more streamlined and simplified of just like the simple fact of, and I think that's why I relate to her, and it's my favorite song, is you work so hard as an artist, as whatever, and I'm sure you guys know this too, and you just want some semblance of legacy and respect, and it's so hard. And so, that's why I love her and I love that song.
Yes, especially when it comes to all the other characters, because throughout this musical, I noticed, and I'm sure B noticed as well, that every character has like a breakout scene, such as like Clarice, which is my second favorite song. It's like the idea of each character has a theme, whereas like I can see where your rock comes in for that because it was very like Joan Jett awesomeness.
Yeah, that's very much who I listen to. Each kind of character had their own kind of instrument that I would go to when I was like working on them, and like obviously Clarice was electric guitar, and I listened to a lot of like female artists that I really love, female early punk and rock artists like Pat Benatar and Hart and Joan Jett. Just like I went back to like simple chords. I was like, let's just do some rock. I worked with a really kick-ass guitar player who showed me some ACD riffs that I really loved, and I was like, all right, what would Clarice do? Let's be honest. She would have this like dueling guitars, and that's kind of what it's turned into, is with her and Annabeth, and that was a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, you mentioned that sort of like in your career you've been associated with taking rock music and making it sort of a musical thing. Was that just like the obvious genre for you with Percy Jackson, or did you consider other genres? Because I mean,
I have definitely have this aesthetic. I've written in a lot of different styles over the years for different projects. Obviously, form dictates function for a lot of things. If I'm writing a turn of the century piece, I'm not gonna give my best, pop rock. But I will say this, like the angst of like early 2000s, late 90s kind of indie rock, the angst of that, the energy of that, the grunginess of that, it fits so well with the kind of lost teen angst that these characters are feeling, and it marriages very well to that. Also, like structurally, like when I'm working on rock music, it's a great vehicle to get exposition out, because it's very elegant just to do verse, chorus, verse, chorus. The bridge is like a transition or a fight. There's so much stage combat in the show, or something like that, a montage to get us from one place to another. So pop rock music was like a very elegant, I don't know about elegant, but a very efficient way to get exposition out. You look at a song like "They Got Expelled," and it's the 7 minutes. How am I going to get the entire first two chapters into like one sequence? We have to establish that like the gods are real, that monsters are like all this stuff. The tone of the show, Mrs. Dodd's going to turn into a monster. All this stuff. And we've tweaked it a little since it's been on tour. It's a little snarkier in the new version that we have since the album, which I'm excited for you guys to see.
yeah, I'm excited for Snark. I was gonna ask because Percy Jackson, I mean, this was written like mid 2000s, so they even like make references to some musical things, and it's like Hilary Duff and stuff. Did you think of that at all? Like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if you did sort of almost like a pastiche genre thing of like, I'm gonna make this sound like a pop song from that time period?
I feel like it already does that a little bit just because of my influencers, because I'm old, of like, songs I loved growing up. But I think like it might also like date the show a bit. So I tried to just find like a sound or a genre of like songs that I love that I think that have a little bit of longevity to them, or are kind of like tried and true, and or like songwriters that I think can transcend or hold up. So like I as much as I love like Bruce Springsteen, for example, like Bored to Run and that Glockenspiel line, that was big influence on like the song Good Kid, but also was Paramore, that was like a bit of that. I mean, obviously I listened to a lot of My Chemical Romance. That was a big influence.
We mentioned that band a lot on the show, I feel like.
Well, great. It was a big influence on Bring on the Monsters, for sure. The Weezer was a big influence on me.
Okay,
The
yeah.
Killers. But like it would depend on the character, right? So like, here we are in this like crazy underworld sequence. So I was like trying to listen to like bands that had like disco soul feel. So I'd listen to like The Heavy, or I'd listen to like new funkadelic, or bands that I love like that. Or then I would be listening, if it's Grover, it's like going to be fun and kind of folky. So I'd listen to like kind of folk singers, Lone Bellow, or pop stuff. I mean, I listened to like a lot of Ryan Adams and stuff like that. That was a big influence on me on like The Tree on the Hill, like a murder ballad kind of thing, which I'd originally written on acoustic guitar, but then we put on electric guitar, and it felt good. It's basically a Ryan Adams song with a Smashing Pumpkins bridge. I think that's basically Tree on the Hill. And then for like Clarice, yeah, it was all that other great, rock from the early 80s and 90s. But I also, for like the bigger moments of like monster magic, my parents love classical music. I grew up only having to listen to classical music. Wasn't allowed to listen really to rock music until
Oh wow.
I was in middle school or something. Then my parents got me like a boom box, we called it back in the day, a boom box. And then I discovered like Bon Jovi, and my life was complete. But so like I did have a really great appreciation for like a classical music, like the Wagner and the Ring Cycle, or Gustav Holst, The Planets. That classical piece of music was a huge influence on this show because, all the planets had all the Roman gods. So you get like Mars and you get like these epic sounds. So I was like, how do I create that sound with an electric guitar? How do I make something feel big and like vast and mythic and epic with, not a ton of instruments, but kind of like using orchestral cues from some of these like classical writers I love, Benjamin Britten or Stravinsky or stuff like that.
When it comes to the musical, the other thing that I noticed is there's so many different styles, such as we have the campfire song and we have the road trip song, which for a perfect musical like this, getting the tone right was probably one of the hardest things to do because, you had to compete with Poopy when it comes to the movie. So getting that tone must have been the most important thing, because when I was noticing like the bridges, you have some like funny dialogue. Like my favorite part of this musical is when they're lost in the woods in New Jersey and they're talking to the squirrel. Like it's like the best like bridge ever you could possibly have.
But yeah, I mean, like, I love Stephen Sondheim. I clearly, because I've been in musicals forever, I love classic musical theater, and so that was a fun one where I was like, okay, what is like kind of like if Stephen Sondheim was adapting like an R.L. Stine book where kids are lost in the woods and have a complete nervous breakdown, like what would that sound like a la Scooby Doo or something? And that's basically where that came out of. I don't remember who came up with the squirrel. I definitely came up with DJ Cerberus, but I think Joe may have been like, what if you run into a squirrel? And I'm like, what if the squirrel talks to them? And we're like, no one's ever going to produce this musical ever. We had like someone doing squirrel chirp. And I was like, oh God, this is not going to make it into the album. And it surely made it into the album.
Say sorry to the squirrel. You insulted him.
When it comes to also the lyrics, the one thing that I love about this is, again, you incorporated humor in such a great way. Like, there's the monstrous, you all smell like Mickey D's, where you have all these really funny references that just fit so perfectly. It's great synergy with the tone of Percy Jackson, which is supposed to be both lighthearted and sometimes it's supposed to be like really sad.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, but I think like when the kids use humor as a defense mechanism, so it's fun to find like some snarky lines. There's a great I think my favorite line is the one that Annabeth says to Percy, because Percy's like, you set me up. Clarice could have killed me in the bathroom. And it's like, just distracting Clarice, Ares' best warrior, so I could capture their flag. Smart plan. He's like, she could have killed me, and Annabeth's like, plan would have worked either way. They're so close. Some of the lines are so close to the book, and some of the ones we took directly from the book. But like, we were just in the headspace so much of trying to do justice to it. So it felt like we were channeling Rick in some place. At least I hope we were.
So when it comes to adapting, can you talk to us a little bit about the process of taking the book, which is, a full book with like characters, monologues, inner monologues and all that stuff, and putting it into song, because they're two different mediums. How do they work together?
Well, I think what's so great about a book and why I love books so much, and I love YA novels, but is the world. You get immersed in the world, you get lost in it, you get the details of, and in a movie, you can do a crane shot of camp and, the splendor of all of the centaurs coming over a field. We can't do that. We have to describe it. We have to kind of do it with sound and emotion in a different way. So I love that our show embraces the kind of ragtag scrappiness. We set it in kind of a skate park at like an Acropolis with like a bunch of angsty kids that use found objects to create what a theater professional said to me, rough magic. He thought the show felt like it had rough magic. I love that term, because I think that's what we do. You see all the pieces, you see all the scenes, you see Mrs. Dodds turning into a monster, but it doesn't make it any less scary or exciting that you see that she's this gigantic puppet made out of 4 people with giant glowing eyes and all this stuff. And you add sound to it and this like really scary electric guitar underneath that. And all of a sudden it like takes your imagination takes over, and that other element of being an audience member like kicks in. So we had to kind of trust that we had a great director, a guy named Stephen Brackett, who also is doing Be More Chill, that we had a sense of play to be able to kind of adapt as we went. I know Joe on the show mentioned like that great stage direction of like when Mr. Brunner gets up from his wheelchair and reveals he's a centaur, we would like, have fun, director. We would have these things. And we just kind of, rather than try to hide it, we just like call it out and let's just do it. Let's just have fun. Let's just make it bigger and weirder, and however we can. We have these toilet paper cannons that represent the water that we shoot out at people, all that kind of stuff. Like, this water is really hard to represent on stage. But Joe and I mapped out like what are the most important beats. It was tricky because it was a real collaboration. It was really hard as a 1 hour because God, we had to cut so much down and try to keep things together when it was originally a TYA. It was so great to be able to like expand the show and let it breathe and be kind of what it always wanted to be. We would find like, how did you do Drive? How do we get like little nods to things like the Lotus Hotel and stuff like that without losing forward momentum of the show? What are the most important beats that we need to have in terms of how is this going to affect our characters? I really fought to have like the tree on the hill moment because we needed Grover to understand what his backstory is and why the gods act the way, or the kids are acting the way they are, and the baggage that they carry, so that Luke's reprise at the end really pays off. You set all these little Easter eggs and themes as you go along in Act 1 for the characters to have, and then you hope that they pay off in exciting or different ways in Act 2 or later on in the show. And I think that's one of the more successful ones, is when Luke takes that good kid theme and sings it right back in Percy's face. And I think it's really exciting. And the other thing was Nancy and Marietta, agents, are wonderful. They would come in and be like, no, you can't combine that character. No, you can't do that.
I'm sure they were having like war flashbacks to the movie and like, don't stop.
Oh, I bet.
To streamline things that originally were like, maybe we could make Clarice and Annabeth one character. Like, absolutely not. We're like, okay, fair enough, cool. And they're like, what if we tried to make like Hades and Ares a thing? And they were like, no. And then we also were like, what do the fans, what do they say are the most iconic moments for them? And when they would say like the Ares beach scene, when Percy finally like owns up to his power, we were like, okay, that's it. That's an important moment. Like, Hades is important, but it's not that important. So we have Hades in the show, but really it's about Ares. And it's also, then you get to see Ares and Clarice. He's singing Clarice's song, just it's nastier and bigger. So you get that the parents and children dynamic. You get to see where she gets it from and all that kind of stuff, that like cycles of stuff. And that's where you start to see like it's really exciting structurally of how to put the pieces together. It's this crazy jigsaw puzzle. I just remember freaking out because Barbara Pasternak, the head of TheaterWorks, and like Joe and I were at dinner, and they were like, you got to fix the end of the show. I'm like, I don't know. What do you mean? They're like, you have to get from Hades, you have to get us back to, and it should be one song. And I'm like, guys, I can't. I don't know what, I don't know how, gets the, and I was like, you're just going to write the song. And I said to Joe, I said, will you just give me a hook, give me a title, and I'll write to that hook. What should it be? And he's like, oh, Son of Poseidon. It's Percy acknowledging who his dad is, forgiving his dad, and kind of owning up to his power and embracing it rather than running from it, and running and also standing up now and fighting rather than kind of freaking out, running away, and using his power. And I'm like, oh, he's coming into who he is. This is embracing who he is, and he uses the seashell. His dad got him well in the books. Obviously, it's
the pearls.
The pearls, right? They're the pearls in the books, but it's easier visually to see a seashell in it. So we had to represent certain things like that. And he blows the seashell was also a great like auditory in terms of like those are things that you do as you adapt. What reads better? What is a simple thing that the audience recall that his dad gave him? And then it was like, okay, I was off to the races. I could see how the whole thing fit together and I think I wrote it like in a fever dream, like in a night. That song, and then the next day we like put it into the show. It's crazy.
I really feel like one thing you guys got right was the importance of the like parent-child dynamic. Like even just like right off the bat, like one of the first lines in the first song is the gods are real and they have kids and those kids have issues. And I felt that was like such a succinct way to describe basically like not just the plot of this book. Honestly, this whole series could be synthesized into that one phrase. And I thought that was just so funny that you were able to like convey all of that exposition that you get from the books in just something so short as that. Because I almost like burst out laughing when I heard that line, because it just was so accurate to what was the characters were going through. And then, it starts off like being sort of comedic, and then like at the end you're like, oh, that's the motivation that Luke has. So it's like tied through, like you get the sense that this isn't out of nowhere that he feels this way.
There's so many ways that can go bad, right? That can go down. And are you going to learn from your mistakes? Are you going to fight their battles? Or are you going to kind of learn what is worth fighting for, what is worth letting go and forgiving, or you're going to be trapped in this mess forever, and that's something that's very Greek, right? Those cycles of getting out of them and all that kind of stuff.
It's like the idea of like what is like a prophecy, and is everything written in stone, and can we break it? Very Terminator 2, but it's very much like, can we defeat it? Can we, is the sins of our fathers passed down to the son?
Right. Well, and what I love about the show, and what I think is a little subversive about it, if you can even say that, is that like we have the show that's going on across the country, and this last song is my favorite. My favorite movie obviously is like The Empire Strikes Back, and it's because it ends on a cliffhanger, because you don't know what's going to happen. You've got one of your hero's best friend is in carbonite. Who's gonna, our hero's wounded. It's like everybody's all scattered to the winds. It's like, how is this going? We just have to keep hoping, and we have to keep going forward, and we have to fight, and you have to go out in the world. And Percy's like, the world, the monsters are out there, and they really are. There are so many monsters that we have to deal with and fight. And the battles are the ones that are worth taking up, and that kind of getting clarity for that is exciting. That we get that message of like, you got to fight for the change you want to see. As cheesy as that might seem, it's easier said than.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to mention was you said that, you're a fan of YA. Was that something you had like in the back of your mind as you were adapting this? Like what's important in YA that you wanted to like convey in the musical? Like I think that one thing that comes across in the way that the lyrics are written is like these still feel like kids, which is kind of hard because also they're cast as adults, so that's like an interesting thing.
Part of that was out of necessity, because it was originally a TYA, so we needed adult actors. We cast young. I mean, they're in their 20s, but obviously it's tricky. Also, in terms of voices, to do rock music and the kinds of belting and things that we're requiring for the kinds of sounds we wanted, we needed changed voices and the kinds of union stuff that we had to go through. So I kind of liken it to, if you were to drop in and see one musical version of like a Harry Potter, would you want Harry when he's 13 or Harry when he's like 16, 17? So I kind of liken it to like us dropping in the world of them being like 16, 17, even though they're played by slightly older actors. Obviously, maybe if the show ever gets licensed, we'll do young kids, and that'll be exciting too. But in terms of like YA and tone, yeah, I mean, that is something that we it goes back to the idea of like keeping things, the humor coming from awkward situations that they're using as a defense mechanism, not being fully sure of themselves, but like, masking it with bravado and then totally screwing things up, all that kind of stuff. And I love that.
What's your some of your favorite YA?
I mean, I'm old, so like Roald Dahl stuff, like Witches, John Belair stuff. The House with a Clock in His Walls was one of my favorite books. But I mean, like Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials, I discovered later. But those really emotionally really kill me. They're maybe one of my favorites. But I read like Ender's Game was like one of my favorite books I read, and that's not really YA, but it was like. I read it when I was in that age. I really love kids dealing with a lot.
Well, Roald Dahl is like all dark humor.
It's dark and it's
so
funny.
Dark.
His sense of humor is so messed up, and I think like
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So
That's the great thing about YA is you actually can expand into different understandings, different ideas and thoughts, just because when it comes to YA, you're teaching the next generation or the generation before that or after that. The most unique thing about YA is that it doesn't really talk down to kids all that much, and rather it's almost on their same level. Whereas adult books that I've read, they're pretty much like, well, you guys are a bunch of idiots, so I'm going to like spoon feed you the plot. Here's a little more num 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 num. Like,
I gotta be honest. Some YA books are a little more sophisticated than some
Yeah.
actual fiction, the fiction I've read. And I think that goes also to like what's cool about the demographic that comes to see our show, and what I've seen lately at the theater when I've gone to see the show recently, is you get people that have never seen a musical before because they're fans of the book, so they show up and they're like, "Oh, what is
Right.
this? Theater's cool too. I love that." Fans of like comics and graphic novels and things, that's cool. And we get like teens and we that have are reading the books now. We get their parents that were reading the books, or we get like 20s and millennials or in their 30s that read the books and they want to relive their best moments. That's what's so great about Rick, that has just kept being so prolific and coming up with all these stories, is like there's like two generations that are like, or grandparents that are coming to the theater. I had an 80-year-old sound designer came to the theater and was like, "Oh, I love this. This is great," and he's standing next to a 13-year-old who's like losing his mind, and it was great.
What has been one of your favorite stories you've heard from either someone that saw the show, or what has been like one of those things that you're just so happy about that you got to hear? Like, yes, I can't believe that my show did this to somebody. You're like, oh, I'm so happy.
I think like there was a show where the mom said that like my son doesn't read, and we saw this musical and he fell in love with it, and he didn't know it anything, so he like found the book through the musical. And so
Oh.
he discovered reading, and now he reads like voraciously. He's read all the books. Stuff like that is great. I mean, like there's also like musical theater. There's a stigma still in young boys can't like musicals, and it's so great to have like the other day in Philly, I saw like a bunch of like teenage kids, and a lot of them are boys that are eating it up and loving it. And like they see themselves in Percy. That's a larger discussion in terms of representation and other things too, of like having people that look like you, and that's why also it was important to have a pretty diverse cast on stage to represent the world that we see. The very first fan letter we got was from a little boy who drew like himself on a Pegasus reading a book,
Huh.
and his name was like Armando, and he sent it to his teacher, and he's like,
Oh,
"Please give this to." It was like to the local. TheaterWorks was great because they do a lot of like free summer theater, and they do these like donor benefits. So like this donor had like paid for all these kids in an underserved school that had never seen a musical before to come see our show. And so it was their first theater experience. And this kid was like, he's like, "I want to be in theater. I want to write stories. I think, yeah, it was like, I want to write stories. I want to be a storyteller." And he drew this amazing picture. He was like 9. I had a woman told me the other day that her daughter was really quiet. And now that she's been singing sheet music, like Grand Plan, she's been like found her voice in this, and she like loves that character so much. I had a trans fan of the show got some tattoos that the other day of a lyric that said "normal is a myth" and had the Apollo symbol on their arm, and I thought that was really powerful. I'm like, okay, like everybody is finding something with the stories or with the books, and that there's nothing better than that. And also the fans, because those are the hardest people to please. I mean, like you guys, I mean, like, my God, we were so burned by the movies, and Rick was so hurt, and to try to regain your trust was hard. And we worked our butts off. So the fact that the fans have responded so positively, that it's come full circle, and they like claimed ownership of the musical, and they're so proud of it, that's the best part.
yeah, I have a friend that went to one of the shows recently, and they were talking to a group of people, and some of them had come from Florida all the way from Canada just to see that show, and they were like in the middle of like South Carolina or one of the Carolinas. It was insane.
Oh yeah, we just had a show in North Carolina. Yeah, it's this little show that it's getting out into the world in this way is really exciting. We get to go all over the country to a lot of places that would never have gotten a chance to go to New York to see the show. That's really cool.
Yeah, I feel like the Percy Jackson fandom is interesting that way because, like you said, it's just sort of like all over the place as far as demographics. Like there are people like my age. I mean, we get messages all the time from kids as young as 8 up until like 13, 14-year-olds. Like it's kind of all over the place. There's older people, there's parents. And I think that that's kind of like a cool uniting thing about it, I guess.
That's the great thing about YA, that even though we're adults, we do we ever feel like we're an adult? I think
Right.
like all the stuff that we experienced when we were teenagers, it just happens again to us in a different way. One of my favorite songwriters is a woman named, it's Joe Iconis' wife, actually. Her name is Lauren Marcus. She had this song called "We Don't Grow Up, We Get Meaner," and it was this song, that lyric killed me. And I'm like, please, God, don't let that be the case. But I feel like we do. We find like, oh my God, I'm in this office job and it's like high school all over again. And so I think YA books are a great escape and also a great tool to be like getting in touch with ourselves. And how do we navigate this before the last time? How do I relive some of that? Or how do I make different choices? Those kinds of things.
Especially when it comes to YA, a lot of the times the parents are reading to the kids, so they need to have like when the parents are reading, they find a different type of entertainment.
Absolutely. And that's what I mean. There's some jokes that go a little over kids' head. We have a couple entendre things that are for the parents that are really fun.
The one that cracks me up is Annabeth says in the campfire song, "My mom's Athena. She's sworn off gluten and she's sworn off guys."
I honestly, one of the funniest lines was, what was it? We're gonna like go to the gates of hell, and he's like, oh, it's actually a literal. It's like, oh, close enough. Like I thought that was a very Percy Jackson line.
Or the other one that just cracks me up when I heard it, I keep saying it now. It's when they're doing the drive song and the guys just hop on the
Hop on my
tractor.
tractor. Hop on my tractor. I want to get a shirt that says "Hop on my tractor." Uh,
Oh, it's so
we sell
good.
the squirrels now. That's like one of our things on
Oh,
the
you do.
show, with a little sliding thief
Oh my
T-shirt.
god.
That's like our merch. I love that our swag. It's
Squirrel
like
so
a
much now.
DJ Cerberus shirt and a squirrel and a pen that lights up. I'm like, our swag is awesome. This our show is
That's
so
really
weird.
funny.
It makes me so happy. I'm like, you're not going to see this at a lot of other shows.
No, that's the great thing. Like I've seen a lot of shows that are adaptations of movies or TV shows into plays. Like my favorite, besides The Lightning Thief, of course, is like Evil Dead the
Oh, that's
musical because it's
fun.
so
Yeah,
interactive.
it's really fun.
Uh, my other one that I loved that I saw was called Alien versus the Musical, which is just it's literally aliens invade different musicals, and it's so great. I think they're doing a tour in New York now. That's like the challenging thing. It's like taking something that's so beloved. Like I saw a version of Silence of the Lamb, and it was terrible.
Oh, yeah.
And you take something that's so beloved, and you could either make it terrible or you can make it great. And I think the great advantage of your guys' show is that you have all these creative people that put all this love and effort into the show, and it really shows like almost like night and day. Like here's the Lightning Thief movie, and here's the musical, which has quintessentially like a smaller budget, but has more passion to it and has more production value than a multi-million-dollar movie.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. But I mean, there's just things we just couldn't do. I mean, we have to embrace the theatricality of what it is, and yeah, and if the story is great, and also when we developed it with kids in the audience, and they are a brutal crowd. They will let you know if they don't like something.
Yeah, that's something that Fox didn't do. They're like, wait, kids watch these movies? I thought it was supposed to be the adults.
Right. So we got the luxury of testing this out over workshops and trial and error over the course of, now it's been 6 years to kind of battle test it, road test it, make sure that, are the jokes working? Is the heart still there? Is it looking cool? Is it feeling right? All of that stuff. That also that I will say that the producers were, good enough to be like, it's not working. They were hard on us, really hard on us. Rick's agents were hard on us, and I'm glad they were. And we all pushed each other. We were excited about what it could be. But we were like, we will not rest until even in previews, we were writing new songs and new scenes, and we would work literally until our first audience, and through the first 3 weeks, we were trying new things every night. And we had so many wonderful actors that helped develop the show over workshops and things like that too. But like Kristen Stokes had been with the show since the very first workshop, and she knows Annabeth like the back of her head. I will ask her a question about the book, and I'm like, "What happened in this book on the thing and that thing?" It's like, "Oh, actually, it's chapter 13, and this is the moment when Percy and Annabeth are in the train." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, great." She is Annabeth. She is Annabeth, and those characters, because they did the show off Broadway and then had a bit of time before it went on tour, they've been thinking of those actors rather have been thinking about these roles, and they're like nuanced and smart, and that's that extra missing ingredient, and then you put the audience with it, and it's really exciting.
Now, Rob, I have one more question for you. If you could work on any YA book to adapt into a new musical, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. that is hard. That's really hard. I mean, like, obviously, I almost every role has been adapted. I always wanted to adapt Matilda, then it was adapted. So,
Tim and Chin beat you to it.
yeah, they did it, and it's a great musical. I know that they're doing a play adaptation of this Dark Material, so we'll see how that goes. Maybe it would be a Stephen King book, like Stand By Me or something like that. That it has kind of YA themes in it, but is kind of horror elements or supernatural elements.
Be really
to it.
cool. That would be
Now
really
I want a
cool.
musical version of Firestarter.
Oh my god! Oh, that's a good one. But Stephen King has a history of like musicals that have not gone so well. I like Carrie, even though Carrie had a resurgence and it did better. So like, I still think there's hope for Carrie.
I actually got to go see Carrie. I was so confused. I bought like extra like priced seats. Like why the heck did I have to spend more money on this? And Carrie's doing like her Carrie magic, and all our seats are start moving because there's like two burly guys just literally pushing our chairs. I'm like, oh. That's
so
why.
Well, if you guys think of one that I should adapt that you really love, let me know, because maybe I haven't read it yet. Maybe there's one that I just like overlooking.
I would love Something Wicked This Way Comes as a musical, but that's just me.
Oh yeah.
I actually tried that. That's funny.
What?
I've seen the movie, I read the book. Born on Halloween, obviously. So like that, I love. I love Ray Bradbury and all that. So Something Wicked was near and dear to my heart. I actually wrote 3 songs. I emailed Ray Bradbury as a friend in LA that was a part of his theater company. I like wrote him this epic email to him that was like, please, 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 just give me a chance, give me a shot. Nothing. It was not to be. But that was before I had an agent. That was before I had a YA novel. And the songs were okay. They were pretty good. One was pretty spooky, I have to say.
You've just made my day, right? Because Ray Bradbury is one of my favorite authors, and I just did a whole 1-act play about him. So I'm so giddy. I'm so giddy.
What was it? What's it called?
It was called Live Forever. It was all about his life.
Oh, that is very cool. Yeah, love Ray Bradbury. I think his social commentary is so scathing. Like I love like H.P. Lovecraft, but he doesn't really like have anything. It's spooky and atmospheric. But what I love about like Ray Bradbury is he'll make you think. The man is dealing with some social issues and things that are like really that still haven't gotten addressed today. Or that were like revelatory or he saw into the future of where things might be. He is an incredible writer.
Yes, and God rest his soul. What a wonderful man.
Yeah. So maybe not time, but maybe show like Something Wicked. I do love. God, I love that book. It's so creepy. So creepy.
I think it's that time of day again where we have to wrap up the show. Thank you so much, Rob, for coming on the show.
My pleasure, you guys. Thank you for having me, and I hope you enjoy the show. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait to finally see it.
Where can they find you on social media, Rob?
Okay, so I'm R Rokicki. So that's R and then ROKICKS, the Twitters and at the Instagrams, and you can find me there. Yeah, and my website is just robrokicki.com.
Thanks for coming on.
Where can they find you, B?
You can find me on Tumblr at twinpoetry.tumblr.com, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at bkellygorman.
And if you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Suda41. That's SUDA41. Well, thank you so much, Rob, for coming on the show. It's been a real pleasure. We'd love to have you on again and talk more about music and rock operas, because that's so rad.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, we'll have a totally different perspective once we finally see the show.
And if anybody is interested in the tour dates, they are on the Lightning Thief website, which is lightningthiefmusical.com.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Rad. Well, I'm Zach.
I'm B.
I'm Rob.
And keep staying mortal. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.